Like I'll have conversations with students. It's like, hey, what time do you typically wake up? And they look back on things. They're like, well, my first class on Mondays and Wednesdays is 8 o'clock. So I'll get up around like 7 because it takes me a half hour to get ready and then a half hour to walk to class. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, I don't have class till 11. So I'm typically, I won't set an alarm and wake up when I wake up. And I want to like push back against that. And I'm like, no. You need to pick a time to wake up that is not dependent on your first obligation of the day. Mm-hmm. Like it's so important to be able to have a consistent time that you wake up and expectations of that. And then you can roll that back. If you're going to get up at, 6 a.m., you got to roll that back. Then that means to get a full 8 hours of sleep, you should be going to sleep in the 10 o'clock hour, and like you can have that kind of consistency for it. But it's really important to pick a time to wake up that is, once again, not dependent on your obligations consistently. No, like you were saying, if you're working an off-hour shift or things like that, and kids will wake you up. But this is those are exceptions. But like the general rule there is to pick a time to wake up that's not dependent on your obligations. And then in that place, what do you do with that time? Like because of the kind of quiet stillness in the pregnant stillness that the day has yet to happen, mm-hmm. What do you do with that? Well, this is a beautiful time that you can use for reflection, for investing. Not that like this is all about control, because overexerting our control is also a bad thing. But we do need to have certain disciplines and not let life happen to us. Mm-hmm. And that's what I find when people will always wake up dependent on their obligations, is actually their life is controlling them. Mm-hmm. And they're becoming a slave to work, or they're becoming a slave to all these other things. But to have that opportunity to live life instead of life controlling you, I think is really important. And then the second point that I was going to bring up, which is, like I said, a little more of a spiritual point, is I found it's very, very important. I talked to some students a lot about beginning a life of prayer. Like, they encounter the Lord. I want to start praying. What do I do? And it's like, well, pick a time of day that you find you pray best. And if you don't know what that is, start with praying in the morning. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I go there is because that's what the Lord himself did. I remember earlier this year, one of our readings was talking about the Lord was healing a bunch of people and releasing them from demons and all this stuff. And then he got up early in the morning and went to a remote and deserted place to pray with the Father. He got up before everybody else did, and he spent that time in prayer with the Father before everything got started. And that is so important, to be able to have the first thing that we do in the day. We prioritize our relationship with God, and that's the first thing that we do with the day. And so if we're going to have a consistent time of prayer, like to imitate the Lord who did it early in the morning himself, and to not be afraid to do that as well.
Yeah, I think there can be a kind of like simplicity, a kind of docility, a kind of obedience in the choice to give it a go in the morning. Mm-hmm. There's some people who are never going to be morning people.
Yeah.
That's fine. And it's not always to be attributed as fault or blame or weakness or whatever else, right? There are totally valid reasons for which one might not be especially bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning or especially motivated to correct that. I totally get it. But there are certain things in our Christian lives which just need to be in place.
Yep.
And if we keep telling ourselves lies, if we keep telling ourselves half-truths to perpetuate immaturity, which keeps us from maturing into the saints whom God wants us to be, right, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And we need to address that in some way, albeit gently, because you're not just going to lay hold of your humanity and do with it what you will, because it just doesn't work that way. But by a simplicity, a kind of docility, a kind of obedience to the Christian tradition, we're open to a revelation and a grace which can conduct us from a relative immaturity to a relative maturity. And when we look at the saints, it's more often than not that they pray in the morning. Mm-hmm. Father Jacob Bertrand, would you say that you're optimistic about this subscription appeal?
No.
Would you say that you're optimistic about anything?
No.
Well, I am. Folks, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'd greatly appreciate it. Cheers.